We are here with SHA's Russ Yurek. He's going to talk about our efforts to reduce salt usage. Good morning, Russ.
Good morning.
SHA has been trying to decrease its use of salt. Can you tell us why?
Well, there's several reasons. The first, most obvious reason is from a fiscal perspective. The less salt we use, the less we spend replenishing our resources. And what that does is that gives us more money to be able to use to do other things. More importantly, it also has an environmental impact or perspective. If we are putting less salt down in the environment, it'll have less of an impact on the surrounding waterways, the habitat, and our critters. So the less we use, the less of an effect it has on the drinking water that's also going into our reservoirs, which has an impact on our long-term health. And finally, there's a demand versus supply perspective. If we use less, then we're stretching our inventory further throughout the winter season, and it creates less of a shortage on the region as a whole.
Now, how do you make decisions on salting versus pre-treating?
Well, first we want to make sure everybody understands the difference between pre-treating and what we refer to as anti-icing. Salting and anti-icing are different operations. The anti-icing is when we go out and we put the salt brine down prior to a winter event coming in. So you probably see the white pencil lines on the roads. That's the anti-icing before the onset of an event. Salting is when we turn around and we're putting the granular salt down during the event itself. The anti-icing is trying to keep a bond from occurring to the pavement, while the salting is trying to break the bond after it has occurred. We also refer to salt brine applications that are done during an event as direct liquid applications. They basically are the same as the anti-icing operations. The only difference would be the quantity of material we're putting down, but they're basically the same. But again, the anti-icing is before the storm, and the direct liquid applications are done during an event.
How can we justify not using salt when forecasts say ice is likely?
Well, ice is probably one of the most dangerous things that we have to deal with. We'd much rather deal with snow before we have to deal with an ice storm. But the ice is also more difficult to deal with because it generally takes more salt to keep that bond from occurring or to break the bond once it occurs. And public safety is our #1 mission. We have to try to keep the roads as safe as we possibly can. And salt is probably the most cost-effective resource that we have to be able to do that. So there's really not much justification in our mind not to use salt. We will generally be using salt on every event.
Is there math toward this? Like, is it spread every certain number of feet?
Well, we measure the number of gallons that we put down on a lane mile. So the salt brine is always put down when we're doing anti-icing before an event, somewhere in the neighborhood of about 40 gallons per lane mile. If we're doing the direct liquid applications during an event, we're probably putting down between 60 and 80 gallons per lane mile. At 60 gallons per lane mile, that equates to roughly 120 pounds of salt per lane mile on the roadways. When we're putting the granular salt down, we have to adjust the rates based on multiple factors. The biggest factor is pavement temperature. So pavement temperature obviously is going to get colder as the air temperatures drop, but as temperatures are dropping and the pavements are getting colder, it takes a higher percentage of salt salinity to be able to break that bond to the pavements. If you look at the Federal Highway Administration, their recommendations, they suggest we can get our job done with a maximum of 300 pounds per lane mile per inch of snow. So we have a lot of shops that have already are meeting that target. Some of our metropolitan shops are a little bit above that yet, and we're still working to try to get those numbers down within the Federal Highway recommendations.
There are some that say we can do away with salt altogether. Can we, or should we?
Well, I don't believe that we can. A lot of folks don't realize it, but salt is naturally occurring in the environment and the atmosphere. But the environmental issues that happen when salt is introduced in quantities like we're putting down, I don't know if everybody's aware of it, but across the United States of America, the country as a whole, we put down in excess of 20 million tons of salt on our national highway system every year. And that's a lot of salt to be introducing into the environment. So we need to do our part to minimize the impacts that we talked about in the initial question, because salt is the most cost effective and the most efficient resource to be able to keep that bond from occurring and to break that bond. Again, our number one priority is to keep roads safe. And the reason why we want to keep the roads not only safe, but we want to keep the economy moving. Our roadway system is the lifeline for the state of Maryland, for our economy. The more we can turn around and keep folks going to work, keep the trucks going, buses going, you know, all that kind of stuff, you're keeping the economy pumping and it's generating revenue for the state.
Thank you so much, Russ.
Thank
Take
you.
care.